Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking all about IgG food sensitivity testing. So I have a lot of questions from so many people about whether or not it's worth it to do the testing. So I'm going to be sharing the pros of getting IgG testing done, the cons of getting testing done, and whether or not you should actually do it or who it's best for. So just to jump on in, some of the really good reasons why you should do IgG testing or why you might want to is number one, it gives you a long list of foods that you are currently sensitive to. My favorite part is that it breaks it down from most sensitive to least sensitive. So if you have say 100 or 50 different food sensitivities, it'll tell you out of that which ones are the most severe and that you absolutely have to stay away from, and then which are triggers but are less of a trigger than all the foods on there. So that's one of the first reasons, is if you feel like everything you eat is causing a problem, everything you eat is making you sick or causing some sort of reaction, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? Even if you're eating healthy foods, and you're just like, why do I feel like this? It might be a good idea to get the testing done because it shows you which foods exactly are your triggers. So a lot of times you can feel like you're just kind of stuck because you're doing all these supplements and protocols and eating super clean, but you're still reacting to something. So this is a test that would reveal that. IgE food sensitivity testing is where they do a skin prick test. Those are completely inaccurate in terms of food sensitivities, because if you are not deathly allergic or have an anaphylactic type of reaction to that food or substance, or if it's not a lifelong allergy like an IgE allergy, it will come up negative. So it'll say, no, you're not sensitive to wheat, or you're not sensitive to dairy, when really you probably are, but you just don't have an IgE reaction, you have an IgG. So that's where the IgG test comes in and really comes in handy. A couple cons. There actually are a longer list of cons than pros, so I'm gonna go through those with you. One of the first cons is that usually you will come out negative for some foods if you have not eaten it recently prior to getting tested, 2 or 3 weeks prior. So for example, if you have been gluten-free for 6 months and you're like, well, I wanna know if I can have wheat again, you would have to eat wheat and then test in order for it to come up as negative or positive for an allergy. So that's the first con, is if you've haven't had certain foods for a while, you can get tested, and just because they're not coming up on that sensitivity test doesn't mean you're not sensitive. It just means you haven't eaten it recently enough for there to be any antibodies present in regards to that food, if that makes sense. So that's the first con. The second big con is the price. So at least from what I've seen and where I live, you have to pay out of pocket for IgG testing, and it can be anywhere from $200 to $700 depending on the type of test you do. Some do a really extensive test, which is more expensive, but also tests for things like candida, parasites, etc. So it can be quite expensive, and if you are, new on this journey, you're probably spending a lot of money on supplements. You're probably spending a lot of money to see naturopaths and things like that. The last thing you want to do is drop a few $100 on a food sensitivity test. So that's one big con, is I just find the price is hard to get past for a lot of people. The third con, which is a really big one and makes a lot of my decisions for me, is the effectiveness of an IgG test. So what these tests do is they test the antibody levels present in the blood. The antibodies can stay present for about 5-6 weeks, but then they're gone and they're forgotten. So if you have had a sensitivity, for example, to blueberries, and you stop eating blueberries for 6 weeks, if it's an IgG sensitivity, it will disappear after 6 weeks. And if you introduce blueberries after 6 weeks, I can almost guarantee, for the most part, that you will not be sensitive to that food anymore, because your body forgets that it ever had a problem with it. Whereas IgG sensitivities are lifelong. Your body always has a memory and always creates a reaction to that specific food or substance. So IgG is temporary. So something that's really frustrating is if you do the IgG test and you spend a few $100s, the foods on there are temporary sensitivities. And if you avoid all those foods for a good few weeks, you are no longer sensitive. And if you retest, I can almost guarantee that the new foods that you'll be sensitive to are the ones you were eating during that elimination phase. So just to recap, say you were sensitive to blueberries, so you started eating strawberries instead. If you went to retest your IgG sensitivities after avoiding blueberries for 6 weeks, blueberries would no longer be a trigger, but strawberries most likely would be if you have leaky gut. And that's just because it's how the body works. When you eliminate a food for a period of time, your immune system calms down. It's no longer introduced to that food, so it no longer secretes this inflammation. The antibodies are not produced. When that happens, your body forgets about that sensitivity and it starts forming new ones to the new foods that you're eating, because those new food protein particles are what are entering your bloodstream and causing a new reaction. So something that I think about is, if you're going to do an IgG test, is it worth it to spend a few $100s to have the test only be accurate for a couple weeks? If you took the test last year and that now you're just starting to say, all right, I'm going to start eliminating those foods on that test, it's probably not worth it, because the foods on that test I can almost guarantee are no longer your sensitivities if it was done like a year ago. So I have a lot of clients who give me an IgG test from, say, 2018 or 2017, and I don't even acknowledge it, just because for the most part, I mean, I look at it of course and think about it, but for the most part they're no longer sensitive to those foods, or at least many of the foods on that list. So it kind of is obsolete, and that's what can be really frustrating. So if you are not willing to spend the $200 every few weeks to find out your new sensitivities until you heal leaky gut and really rebalance your system, then IgG testing might not be best for you. What I recommend instead, and after, those are my main cons for the IgG testing. So here is what I recommend doing. If you are a person who has like Lyme disease, something severely triggering a compromised immune system, something that is really debilitating, maybe fibromyalgia or something, and you seriously have to avoid your trigger foods in order to significantly reduce inflammation, then I recommend getting IgG testing, and I recommend doing it every 6 to 8 weeks. Spend the money, it's worth it, and if you just keep rotating the foods off on those lists, then you'll most likely be able to significantly reduce your inflammation, and it will be worth it for you. But if you have something like psoriasis or eczema, or you're just trying to eat healthier, or you maybe have some histamine issues, what I would recommend is not doing the IgG test and instead eliminating all inflammatory foods. So the main inflammatory foods are gluten, dairy, cane sugar, peanuts, fermented food, what else? Anything super, like citrus, eggs can be inflammatory, pork and beef. There's a longer list. I have an article on holisticspring.com. If you go under the Learn tab, you'll see an article about autoimmune disorders and the main list of trigger foods, so you can check that out and avoid those main foods, or you can Google a histamine forming list and avoid everything on there as well. But if you avoid the main common trigger foods, soy and corn should be on that list as well, you most likely are fine and you don't have to do a sensitivity testing. As for the other foods you're consuming in your diet, rotate them. So avoid the trigger foods and then just rotate the rest of your foods. Don't do blueberries every day, don't do chicken every day, don't do avocados every day. Do, blueberries one day, then strawberries, then raspberries. Do chicken and then turkey and then salmon. Do avocado and then coconut and then almonds, etc. So that way you're not just eating the same foods over and over, and that way you're not getting your immune system in contact with these same foods over and over. And that has been proven over and over with my clients, is if you avoid the inflammatory foods in general, which are usually going to be the main foods that come up on your sensitivity testing anyways, if you avoid those foods, you can save the $200 and significantly reduce inflammation. And then while you're avoiding those foods, just rotate the other foods that you're on, and that will significantly reduce inflammation. And you most likely do not have to do the food sensitivity testing and can heal no problem without it. So those are my main suggestions and tips. I hope this is making sense. Like I said, if you have major issues where you have to figure out what you're sensitive to because there's no other way to reduce inflammation, then the test can really be worth it. But for most people, I find, like, if they, like, I have clients who ask me all the time, should I get the testing done? And I always say, if you want to spend the money, go for it. Like, I mean, it's always nice to know, but if you're not comfortable with spending a few $100s and it, not being accurate after 6 to 8 weeks, then I recommend not doing it and just following, the anti-inflammatory type of diet and eating good, wholesome, nutritious, alkaline food. So those are my tips and suggestions. There's a lot more information about the IgG testing. There's a lot more knowledge that you guys can look into. I have talked about it on my Instagram before, but I wanted to make a video because I know a lot of you don't have Instagram or don't follow me there, and I want you to be getting these benefits, as it's a question I get asked all the time. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. I hope everything I said makes sense. I know I went through it really quickly. At the end of the day, it does cost a lot of money, and usually the foods you're sensitive to are the foods that you're eating frequently. So I had a client one time who we did a protocol together, and she was sensitive to so many berries. She did an IgG test and was sensitive to so many different berries, but she could have had gooseberries. So I said, why don't you just eat gooseberries for a little bit and maybe rotate them with some blackberries, as those were the two she could have, and avoid the other ones for a little bit, which is what she did. And then after, she went and had a new IgG testing done, and sure enough, all the old berries were no longer on her list, but the new berries that were on her list were gooseberries and blackberries, and that's because that's what she was eating and introducing her immune system to. So food sensitivities will constantly change and rotate. Once you seal up the gut, and food particles and undigested food particles specifically cannot enter your blood, your immune system won't be coming in contact with them as frequently, and you wouldn't be developing, so many sensitivities. So I would just give your body time. Something else to really do alongside this are digestive enzymes, and possibly hydrochloric acid if you have an underactive stomach. It's something you really want to think about, as the more you digest your food in the stomach and the colon, the less chance of it entering your gut or your bloodstream, undigested. So the less chance you'll get that inflammatory response. I love you all. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you have an awesome day, and we'll chat soon. Bye.